and Mochall. And we're going to start in Legacy with one of the absolute masters of Legacy. You talk to people who know this format, who study this format, who watch a lot of this format. Noah Walker is the person who comes up over and over as maybe the best Legacy player in the world. I think he has claim to that throne.
Yeah, he doesn't look for a lot of input from his teammates, not because he doesn't respect them, but because he is the master of the format. He knows what he's doing. He's the one who's going to come up with the right line.
And has played Delver strategies for what feels like decades now. Noah's a young man. I mean, he was a fixture of the tournament scene at a very young age. Yep. But has certainly cast his share of Delvers over time. Taking on Rakdos Reanimator in this match in the hands of Nathan Grossfield.
Yeah, the Reanimator deck is a deck that I kind of like right now when people are trying to play these 4-color strategies, a lot of Ren and 6 running around. There's less dazes in the format. There's just so much less that you seem to have to dodge in order to reanimate one of your fatties. So just one piece of discard, one unmask, and then potentially the coast is just clear to do your thing.
Yeah, and there is a good amount of discard in this list. There's the 2 Cabal Therapies, 2 Thoughtseize, and as you mentioned, 4 copies of Unmask. Nathan going to try and get a peek at Noah's hand, figure out if the coast is clear very early in this game. You see a Chrome Mox here, only a 1 of in this list. Going to put an Exhume under that Chrome Mox, meaning that Mox will be able to tap for black. And we're going to cast Unmask. Unmask, of course, a free spell from way back in the day. It's targeting Nathan here, though. And what it's going to do is put Tidespout Tyrant into the graveyard, follow up, cast Exhume, putting Noah to the test here. Force of Will or no. Noah says, of course I have Force of Will. Come on. You think this is my first rodeo?
And it's just so frustrating sometimes when you're on the Reanimator side because you use every last card to do that, right?
Absolutely. But the top of the deck now very live. Any Animate Dead, any Exhume, any Reanimate, 12 cards. I guess there's only 9 of those left. We see 3 sprawled about the battlefield presently, but there's a lot of live draws here. And Faithless Looting working as a bit of a redraw. Noah, though, found his clock. Delver of Secrets on the other side of the battlefield. Grossfield pitches Unmask, as well as a Marsh Flats.
Oh, geez. Do we want to play around days now as well?
It's like Noah's going to go ahead and cast a Lightning Bolt at end step, trying to get that clock going. Does not flip the Delver. Oftentimes, that can be a break point in this matchup, whether you can find that free Delver flip. Noah does not.
It's a small reprieve.
Grossfield, I believe, with Animate Dead in hand, possibly.
Yeah, it looked like that was the draw for the turn.
You know, Tidespout Tyrant, though, not the most fearsome of the reanimation targets in this deck right now.
Yeah, it's funny because even if he resolves his reanimation spell, there's a legitimate chance that he just can't attack with it for many turns, right?
Yeah, just a 5/5 flyer until Grossfield finds more spells to use Tidespout Tyrant's ability. Whenever you cast the spell, you get to return target permanent to its owner's hand. But Tidespout Tyrant on its own, unlike Gristlebrand, doesn't really do all that much. Delver does flip now, revealing Preordain, and the beats are coming. Grossfield down to 12.
And it looks like Nathan's taking the line where he wants to try to play around days. I don't particularly like it. If you don't draw another mana source, you've just waited so many turns. You're actually giving your opponent more turns to draw that daze if you don't draw a third mana source. And potentially they don't have it, so you wanted to resolve that spell as soon as possible. You don't want to be taking this extra damage in the meantime and just be behind the 8-ball if you are able to resolve your spell later.
Yeah, just always jam. 100% of the time. I think once you play turn 1 the way that Grossfield did, you're pretty priced into the all-in plans at that point. Here's a Dark Ritual. That's going to allow some ability to play around days. Here's a Thoughtseize targeting Noah.
All right, we're going to use all of our cards here.
Odds look good at getting a reanimation target here. Let's see. Any responses from Noah to this Thoughtseize? No, presents the hand. Spell Snare, Daze, Red and 6, Tarmogoyf. A timely Thoughtseize here. Certainly gonna take that Spell Snare. We'll have mana available to pay for Daze. And we're gonna see Tidespout Tyrant enter the battlefield. As we mentioned, though, it's gonna need some help.
Yeah, it's funny because he used so many spells in order to deploy this.
Yep.
And it'd just be so much better to do it in the other order.
Yeah, it wouldn't have resolved, though. Had to do it this way. So Grossfield now happily with a blocker on his side of the battlefield. Noah's still with no green source for either that Tarmogoyf or that Ren and 6.
Yeah, that's pretty significant here.
Absolutely.
Those are the cards that would put him way ahead.
Letting your opponent untap with a Tidespout Tyrant, quite scary. Card can do some stuff.
Yeah, I don't like this line.
It's like Dark Ritual was the draw.
Yeah, he used it to bounce the creature.
Right.
Now he's wondering if he wants to cast
Faithless Looting.
Faithless Looting. I feel like you wait on the Faithless Looting.
Well, found another one, so
Sure.
point is moot, but I understand where you're coming from.
Just bouncing the land does not seem significant at all here. But having the Faithless Looting later to bounce a permanent seems like it could be very relevant.
Right.
Which is why I would have wanted to wait on it.
Let's see how it plays out. Here's a Wasteland on that mana source. And Delver is replayed. Only Chrome Mox and black mana presently.
Confirming life totals here, I think.
Yeah, a little counting going on. We do see our first result over in our modern matchup. Oliver Tomajko on Hogak beating Will Rhea and Infect. I think Infect with one of the few decks that has a decent Hogak matchup. You notice I used the word decent.
They're solid 45%.
There's no great matchups against Hogak. But I think Infect struggles a lot against the rest of the field. Although on this day, too, absolutely loaded up with Hogak, Will Rhea might find himself in a very nice position. Delver's flipped again. Here it comes into the red zone.
Yeah, the Hogak decks just start with so little interaction. And so the Infect deck is actually fast enough to finish people off on turn 3 or turn 4 a lot of the time.
Turns back to Will.
Got ourselves a good old-fashioned race here.
Yeah. It's tough to race the deck with lightning bolts, I'll say that. Here's another Delver.
Ooh.
Oh, Noah has to put the brakes on. Passes back. Here's an unmask. Timely draw. That's going to bounce that Delver. And Tidespout Tyrant is going to get the job done. So Nathan Grossfield able to leverage some mana troubles, I think, on Noah's side.
Yeah, no green source that game was just huge.
But played carefully and was able to set up his reanimation target, and Tidespout Tyrant got the job done. Why don't we take a look at sideboards here, see what we're working with. I think Noah's is a few cards short, what you're seeing on your screen. I'm going to read it from my side. We are dealing with 1 Tormod's Crypt, 1 Abrade, 1 Ancient Grudge, 1 Echoing Truth, 1 Force of Negation, 1 Hydroblast, 1 Magmatic Sinkhole, 1 Pyroblast, a Red Elemental Blast, a Spell Pierce, Submerge, 2 Surgical Extractions. Noah's going to be glad to see those. 1 Vapor Snag, and finally 1 Jace the Mind Sculptor. What do you want to do if you're on Noah's side?
Yeah, I think Noah's just going to want to slow down a little bit in this matchup. He's going to turn into just much more of a control deck. I expect, things like the Lightning Bolts to come out. A lot of the creatures I expect would be shaved. And he's going to bring in just a whole mess of like all the graveyard hate. I like the Tormod's Crypt. I like the Surgical Extractions. Those are pretty obvious. But then the counter spells, Force of Negation, the Spell Pierce, I think is quite good. I see bringing in the Jace when you're slowing down this much. And then I also just like Vapor Snag and Echoing Truth. They do so much work to get some of these cards onto the board, and you just ship it right back to their hand. It's a problem for them.
Yeah, these decks without a lot of classic hard removal certainly like the bounce spells against these reanimator strategies. Meanwhile, the sideboard of Nathan Grossfield, there you see 3 Wear and Tear, 2 Thoughtseize, 2 Reverent Silence, 1 Shenanigans, 1 Abrade, 1 Archetype of Endurance, 1 Ashen Rider, 1 Elish Norn, Grand Cenobite, Iona, Shield of Emeria, Magus of the Moon, and a Coffin Purge. What do you want to do if you're on Nathan's side?
Geez, Coffin Purge. There's a blast.
Yeah, there's some old school hits in this deck.
Flashback, exile a card.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. So I like the 2 Thoughtseize. They're going to pave the way through all of the control that we're talking about coming out of the other deck. And then it's a question of if he wants to diversify his threats. If he feels like Iona is particularly good in this matchup, you just end up choosing blue if it resolves. They can't cantrip. They can't bounce it. It's usually a big problem for them. Something like Ashen Rider, if you want to diversify your threats, the archetype of Endurance, even getting that big body onto the board is often a huge problem when the opponent can't interact with it. So we'll see which direction he goes. I like starting just with the Thoughtseizes and maybe a smattering of these bigger creatures.
Yeah, I think Iona is particularly good here, and I'm going to tell you why, and that may not be at first apparent. Noah's deck list here, listed as 4-color Delver. Quite frankly, the only black card is the Surgical Extraction.
Yep.
So I would not classify this as 4-color Delver. This is Teamer Delver to me, and this is a deck that can struggle once you lock off its access to blue.
Yeah, blue is the big name there.
Right. So we'll have to see if Nathan Grossfield agrees, if he wants to make that kind of move. A lot of big legendary creatures in Nathan's deck. If you enjoy seeing big legendary creatures on the battlefield, you know what you got to check out. Commander versus Live. Craig, I know you're a huge Commander fan. What's your present Commander?
I can't get enough of Commander.
Right. Who are you playing these days?
All of them.
All of the Commanders.
Yeah.
Craig plays every single Commander. That is how much this man loves Commander.
It's tough going to events because I got this giant box
truck
full of decks.
It's a truck, actually. I've seen
it's just
you.
so much stuff to bring with me.
You back up a semi to the convention center, and you're just unloading these Commander decks. It's pallets upon pallets, because you have one for every possible Commander.
Yeah, and I actually just end up not playing any games because it takes so long to try to find
unload
the deck that I want to play, and then it's just the end of the day.
That is a problem for the most devout Commander fans like yourself, who do, in fact, build around every possible Commander. But the folks on SCG Commander Versus are a little bit more disciplined in their deck building choices. They choose their favorite commanders and go to battle every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You're going to want to check that out. Same channel you're watching on right now, twitch.tv/SCG Tour. My present commander?
Okay, tell me, yeah.
Fibblethip.
Fibblethip, sure.
Yep.
I'm afraid I'd pick one and it's just going to be one of the banned ones.
I also ran that risk, I suppose, but I think Fibblethip is safe. Mono blue Fibblethip. I just like saying Fibblethip. Fibblethip.
Yeah, hit us again.
Fibblethip.
Nailed it.
So no results from the standard match yet. That Bant Ramp versus Bant Scapeshift matchup can be a little bit of a slog. Pretty intricate stuff going on there as you try and manage your deputies of detention very carefully. Yep. Nissa often gets out of hand. Interesting stuff. I like Bant Scapeshift quite a bit. I know people are a little finicky about it, but I do think it leads to a lot of interesting game states. You remember the game where the door just gets slammed on you. They play Teferi, they play End-Step Scapeshift, make a ton of zombies, and you just die. And that's a pretty painful interaction. But the games where it doesn't quite hit on all cylinders tend to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, lots of lands in play. Both players generally get to do what they want to do. Often it's a fight over Teferi. If they have Teferi, you have your Teferi. It's just a matter of getting one of them off of the board.
Yeah, definitely the key card in the matchup. And that's one of the reasons I think Agent of Treachery has become the default sideboard tech. Really big in winning those wars. It's like we're on a mulligan here for Nathan Grossfield. How much do you think this deck benefited from the addition of the London Mulligan? It seems like the Reanimator strategy's pretty significant upgrade there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the decks that just require the right cards to do what they do. I think of a deck like Storm, and it's not quite the same. Often that's just a critical mass style of deck. It can usually find all the cards it needs to find as long as it has enough mana. to me, Reanimator is not a critical mass deck. It's the exact right cards type of deck.
Right.
And so, yeah, the London Mulligan is just great for those styles of decks.
Yeah, it's funny to say this. If you're not a Legacy player, a way to understand this deck a little bit better might just be equating it with something like Tron. You put your pieces together, there's a huge threat, and you try and ride that to victory.
Yep.
Pieces look a little different in this case. They're not lands. They're instead a couple of spells. And here you see a mulligan to 5 for Nathan Grossfield.
Well, we have a second here. Do you want to revisit your modern ban list?
Okay. We can keep having this conversation.
Well, you gave the theoretical pie in the sky.
Right. The one I wouldn't actually push for implementation of. What I think is more interesting, and a proposal I would actually put forth, would be ban Hogak. Card is stupid.
Yep.
It's too good. And I don't think there's any real way to mitigate that, no matter what's going on around it. It will always find a way to be a problem, regardless.
Okay, I can see that.
Ban Faithless Looting. I think the amount of resources that Faithless Looting is capable of generating, even with Hogak out of the format, is problematic. It will always, always, always be a focal point. It creates another zone that basically becomes the primary axis of interaction. When graveyards are good, they're all you care about. And that eats up a lot of sideboard space as well. So I'm just over Faithless Looting. I would let that go. I have a plan, though, to keep players happy, because I know that hits a lot of decks really hard. I have one more ban for you.
Okay.
Do you want to guess?
One more ban.
Yes.
Ancient Stirrings.
No.
Okay, what is it?
Dryad Arbor.
Okay, I can see Dryad Arbor getting the axe.
I think Dryad Arbor goes. And then I'm going to the unban trough.
Oh, this is where we we start at fairly reasonable.
That's where things get a little sketchy. And unfortunately, there's cards in play, so we're going to talk about this match instead. But you stick with us. I promise we'll discuss this in full. We'll talk about my unbans after we see the conclusion of this Noah Walker, Nathan Grossfield match.
Look at you with the tease.
That's called a tease in the biz, Craig. Noah just leading on Polluted Delta here. Verdant Catacombs on the other side of the battlefield for Nathan. Able to grab basics here. That's a big plus for the Reanimator deck.
Yep.
Don't like to expose your mana to Wasteland. 4 copies of Wasteland in Noah's deck.
Well, and we saw a wear and tear in Nathan's deck as he was shuffling. It's possible that's just... We talked yesterday about the standard ad of Disenchant when you're not sure what your opponent has.
Yep, little hedge action.
It's very possible that's just a standard... Hey, when I'm sideboarding, I don't know my opponent's list. Ooh.
So it's unmask time, and Nathan will unmask himself. It is Chancellor of the Annex. So Chancellor of the Annex must have been revealed.
Sure.
And now we get to try and reanimate. Noah does have a response, though, and it's the perfect one, despite that Chancellor.
Yeah, so it could have been either Daze or Surgical Extraction to break this up here.
Couldn't have costed mana, correct.
Round 5. You have 50 minutes. You may begin.
But Noah did, in fact, have it. Surgical Extraction. And this is how we saw the last game start, and it seemed like desperate times for Nathan Grossfield. Found a way out of it last time.
I guess, there were actually a lot of cards. It could have been Force of Will or Force of Negation.
Force of Negation, yeah.
Well. There were a lot there.
That's true. We've gotten a lot broader at this point. Many more free counterspells these days.
To where game 1, it felt, a little unlucky for Nathan to just run into the Force of Will. This game, it just seems so risky to just move all in like that here.
Well, on a mulligan to 5, maybe just not believing in the strength of his hand. Nathan seems to be very aggressive.
That's fair. The mull to 5, that's a very legitimate argument for just taking the aggressive line. You're already so resource light.
Right. And players have playstyles, and players find playstyles that work for them. Nathan may just play this deck very aggressively in that fashion.
Oh, that's a good one.
Dread Horde Arcanist. One of my favorite cards.
Yeah, when you're... I talked about Noah turning into the control deck. This is the perfect card when you turn into the control deck.
Absolutely. This is everything. This is answers. This is card advantage. This is damage Dreadhorde Arcanist, a very versatile card. Cabal Therapy, going to be the name here. Or excuse me, Cabal Therapy going to be the cast. We don't know exactly what it named. It seemed like it didn't name either Brainstorm or Vapor Snag. Noah holding on to those cards. It named Ponder.
Yeah, caught a Ponder. It's kind of funny because when you have the Arcanist on the board, you don't even care.
Right. Yeah, going to get to cast that one anyway, is Noah Walker. Turn heads back to Noah. Here comes a Brainstorm. Yeah, this one's going to snowball very quickly in Noah's favor. Especially because Nathan's going to have to achieve his reanimation goals basically in one fell swoop. Not going to be able to leave a target for the next turn with that surgical extraction sitting there in the graveyard.
Yeah, and when Noah's turn one answer was a surgical extraction, it left no creatures in the opponent's graveyard. It's not, you can't just draw the reanimation spell here because your spell got countered. You need the reanimation spell and a creature and a way to get that creature into the graveyard.
So Noah is just going to fire off the surgical extraction now. And he's going to take therapy.
So I think that says that his Brainstorm gave him something pretty juicy.
Right, that makes sense. Feels if he can protect his hand from discard, he'll be okay. Now we know only 2 copies of therapy in Grossfield's list. Noah's still going to be happy not to have to worry about that card any longer. Meanwhile, over in the modern matchup, we're going to Game 3, Hogak versus Infect.
Yeah, it looks like Noah found himself a Force of Will. That's along the lines of what I would have expected. A hard counter like that or another surgical. These are the only reasons that you use the surgical in your graveyard for, very little gain.
Yep. That Delver almost certain to flip this turn. Surprise, surprise.
So lucky.
Yeah. It was always the best feeling when I remember I played a ton of Miracles back in the day, Counterbalance, Sensei's Divining Top, and you do like Brainstorm on turn 1 and set it up to carefully consider your opponent's play when you had to just play raw Counterbalance on turn 2.
Sure.
And you'd get their 2-drop, and they'd go, "Oh, of course you had it." Like, well, yeah, I put it there.
Yeah.
I knew what I was doing here.
It's the same thing with the Miracles, right?
Right.
Oh, double Arcanist. That's probably good.
Yeah, I think that's going to shut the door pretty quickly here as Noah just gets to find basically whatever card he wants from his deck. Ponders, keeps on top. Here comes the squad rumbling in for 5 damage. We're going to do another Brainstorm.
Oh, man.
Just how do you beat this?
Well, if you don't mulligan to 5, you lead with turn 1 discard spell. Turn 2, you have the extra mana up potentially to play around days.
Right. I mean, you got to do it early. You got to do it early because as soon as you reach a Dreadhorde Arcanist on the battlefield, it just pushes the advantage so fast. It finds a friend many times.
No, yeah, you definitely still have to have a plan where you go for it on turn 2 or 3. But when you're asking how do you beat this, that's the path, right? It's when you punch a hole in the hand, you do the scouting trip with your discard spell to find out exactly what to play around. And then you're able to go from there.
Here's a lightning bolt headed Nathan's way. It was so effective, it blew his life total off of our graphics. That's how devastating that lightning bolt was. And we're headed to Game 3. Noah Walker versus Nathan Grossfield. Any changes we need to make? Consideration on the play draw?
It's this similar question where did Nathan feel like he saw enough cards where he can side out those wear and tears? Because that's a pretty mediocre card to have in your deck if you don't have very specific things you're trying to get.
Right. Noah now working with perfect information, got to take a full look through Nathan's deck and is going to go back to the sideboard. Both players reaching back.
Sure, we saw that there were still some lightning bolts in Noah's deck.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he decides that he wants to shave some more of those, or maybe he already has and he's happy with just the 1 or 2 he has left. Like I said, a lot of the creatures can probably come out in this matchup. We didn't see a Termagoyf come down. I expect True Name Nemesis is not in the deck anymore because it's just so slow.
Right. Makes sense to me. We finally have a result over in our standard matchup. Dylan Donegan takes the first game over Ryan Mochall. Bant Ramp up a game on Bantscape Shift. All right, it's unban time. You ready?
Yeah. Well, no. The truth is, no, I'm not ready.
No.
I'm gonna like throw down my headset and run out of here when you say something ridiculous. But
you can guess my first unban. I gave you enough clues via my bannings.
So this was piggybacking Faithless Looting. So
no, this is piggybacking the Dryad Arbor ban.
Okay, so you want to unban Green Sun Zenith.
I want to unban Green Sun Zenith. Granted, there's a pretty reasonable replacement in Finale.
Yeah, they just gave us another card.
But I think what I'm doing with my next unbanning is juicing a certain set of decks with the hope of them being able to hold down the Ancient Stirrings decks. And so I also want to juice decks that the decks I'm juicing are typically good against. There's like this careful balance I'm trying to maintain.
Okay.
And so I want to push green creature-based strategies. I think that's an important, I guess, line of interaction for the format. You want to keep people honest, force them to play creature removal.
Well, also, that's just a healthier place to be. Generally, it's easier to answer creatures in lots of different matchups than it is to answer non-basic lands in this matchup, and the graveyard in this matchup, and a planeswalker in this matchup.
Yep.
Okay.
My last unban. Ponder. Tell me why I'm crazy. Go ahead. Tell me why you can't possibly have Ponder.
No, Ponder's too good.
Why?
It makes the decks...
Blue-white decks in Modern have like a historic 35% win rate, and everyone pretends they're good. And I just took away Izzet Phoenix's main tool in Faithless Looting. Mm-hmm. They've lost that. So these kind of fair-ish decks that need to have some form of card selection just lost their best option. And I would argue they're already below par with the rest of the format.
Okay, I think you're asking for it when you remove a lot of the graveyard strategies. Mm-hmm. You're asking for the Storm strategies to just come roaring back to life.
If our concern is only Storm, like if that's really what we're worried about after making that kind of move, is hard blue-red Storm, I think there's so many cards that have been printed in the interim that are effectively addressing that type of strategy. And by unlocking some of the more fair things, you can start to consider Thalia a card again, which is like mostly blanked in this format presently. Humans, we know, already a very, very strong contender. I don't know that... I just think there's room to push the more classical archetypes. And I think the way to do that is making them look like these legacy decks. These type of like Delver strategies cannot exist in Modern. Like think about a Teamer Delver deck that had Dreadhorde Arcanist, Ponder, typical Lightning Bolt style removal. Like that can't be something in Modern. It's not realistic for it to do so. And that type of deck is a natural predator on some type of Storm deck, some type of combo-based blue-red deck. So you start unlocking that style of play a little bit. You start moving things a little bit closer to the legacy side of things. Any of this making sense?
No, so you're hitting me with a lot of information here. But so I would posit that giving decks a card like Ponder means they have to play so many fewer good answers to the decks that are preying on them because they'll always find it. We already see things like Izzet Phoenix just playing just a smattering, 2 of this, 3 of that, and just having no problem finding these answers over and over when they need them in the right matchups. And I think giving other decks this same ability is just problematic.
I think you underestimate how good Faithless Looting was for those decks.
No. I understand just how powerful that card was.
So the difference between Serum Visions and Ponder is such that those decks become fundamentally broken and problematic? Because I think you have to concede the point they're lagging behind the rest of the format at this point, right?
Sure, but it is not the difference between Serum Visions and Ponder. Mm-hmm. It's the difference between Ponder and the card that you would cut for it, something like Opt.
Okay.
that is just such an upgrade. You look at so many more cards.
You go deeper. I don't know. I think like this is at least a strategy to me that is trying to emphasize pillars, but it's also very cognizant of what players have invested in and doesn't just rip the format apart. It does like wholesale changes without actually preventing access to the format for a group of players.
I understand. I think, banning Hogak, banning Faithless Looting, and banning Dryad Arbor leaves many decks still intact and will allow the format to adjust just a little bit. I think
the alternative is we say things are fine as they are, and we go into a metagame of Urza and Phoenix. And if that's what you want, that's fine. And I think a lot of people do want that. And my approach is a way to do something more dramatic without really hurting the players. I understand the trepidation, though. I really do, Craig. Like, I get that Ponder's a scary, scary card.
This is a pretty rough line that we ended up taking here. So Nathan was trying to bait out a counter spell with the Reanimate, and then he was going to back it up with like Dark Ritual Exhume. But it wasn't a counter spell. It was the Surgical Extraction that got it, and this is so much more painful for him.
Again, the perfect answer for Noah Walker, and Gristlebrand no longer in the deck after that well-timed Surgical Extraction.
And it looks like there were only 3 Gristlebrands in the deck. That might be one of the cards that he often shaves, goes from 4 to 3 in order to find room for the diversified threats, for the wear and tear, things like that.
Yeah, and again, it feels like Nathan has gone into turn 2, turn 3 of all of these games basically devoid of options. Pulled it out in game 1. Game 2, a much uglier affair. Let's see what he can do here in game 3.
Well, and this was a game, he has an Unmask in his hand.
Right.
He didn't use that. He has another Unmask that he discarded to the Faithless Looting on turn 1. So it was just a matter, he chose to take a line.
Look at this, though. Disaster for Noah Walker. Just passes the turn back without a second land.
Yeah, that tells me that his hand still has to be pretty good.
If you were missing a land there, wouldn't you cantrip?
Yes.
So he's got no cantrips in hand.
So that means he's got to have something like Force of Negation, Force of Will.
You would think so. You would think so. Cantrips are the glue, though, that makes this deck go. And not having that card selection and missing your second land drop, maybe Nathan can rebuild and put together a plan that prevents Noah's ability to interact.
The thing that I always like to see in these situations is these decks that play very low land counts, when they draw a Wasteland here. That's always this is the way you built your deck.
Yeah. Yeah, Wasteland, great when you have things rolling in your favor. The worst when things broke a little bad.
Yeah, it's almost a blank piece of cardboard.
Play here, Dark Ritual. Oh, and the reddish tint of Noah's hand tells me he's got a grip of free counter magic.
Tons of Force of Wills.
Yeah, Force of Negation, Force of Will. They're just piled up in Noah's hand, is my guess. And the play off that Dark Ritual is going to be Faithless Looting. The old value Dark Ritual.
It's actually negative value, right? When you're casting Faithless Looting and you're just losing an additional card out of your hand to do it.
Didn't see any reanimation targets in those 2 cards, did Nathan?
Yeah, what he really needs to find here is a Cabal Therapy. I mean, obviously he needs to find a big creature, but even that's not a help right now. When you're on Nathan's side, you see the way this game is developed, you're just staring at a slew of counter magic on the other side.
Here's another Faithless Looting. This time it meets the days.
Force of Negation, yeah.
Force of Negation, thank you. Pitching days. Much more effective use when that 1 black mana is staring me square in the face. And it's going to go without use. The black mana leaves the battlefield. Turn passes back to Noah Walker, doing a fantastic job mitigating Nathan's plan despite being mana light, but finds a second land now, has a Tarmogoyf in hand, could get the ball rolling here.
Yeah, it won't be the biggest Goyf, but at least it's a clock, and Nathan's in a spot where he just needs to find so much in order to execute his game plan that if you're on Noah's side, all you want is a clock on the board.
True Name Nemesis still in Noah's deck. Just saw it in his hand.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to see that. It tells me that instead of trimming that, he might have decided that like Wrenn and 6 just isn't what he wants to be doing in this matchup, and those might have come out of the deck instead.
TNN pretty good at playing through Tidespout Tyrant. I'll say that.
Yeah, and it's still a threat that effectively attacks the opponent.
Here comes Tarmogoyf.
It's a blue card, so it goes Force of Negation and Force of Will.
Right, of course. Well, here's Dreadhorde Arcanist. We saw last game what kind of shenanigans that card can get up to. No real card drawing in the yard, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he just foregoes using it on the next attack step if he doesn't cast a cantrip first.
Like a lot of reanimation, little bit of disruption. It's time for Unmask. Have a result over in our modern match. Will Rhea taking down Oliver Tomajko. Infect beating Hogak. Leveraging that not so bad matchup.
Yeah.
That's as good as he gets against Hogak. Not so bad. I actually was of the impression that the Infect side was extremely, extremely favored just based on my own experience. Some recent data I saw did not paint it that way. Hogak still with it was a small sample size, but Hogak winning something like 75% of its matches against Infect over the last 2 GPs. I find that fairly unbelievable, but...
Yeah, that would be a huge number, a huge percentage of the time.
A lot of things about Hogak have proven to be unbelievable, quite frankly, so... They have picked up a bunch of collective brutalities recently, has Hogak.
Yeah, that card's great. It's just so versatile.
Yeah, the best thing about it is that it does an effective job of answering your bad matchups. Things like Infect, things like Burn, Mono Red Phoenix. And again, I say bad matchups with a grain of salt, but...
Yeah, it seems like such a good card against that Mono Red Phoenix, Mono Red Prowess deck.
Right.
Where you get to pick off one of their threats. You want the cards in your graveyard, so discarding is not a problem.
Yep. Gain a little life.
Yeah. Peel the important card out of their hand.
Not so bad. So Noah is going to go ahead and use that Surgical Extraction. Going to get rid of the Unmasks from Nathan's deck. Again, looks like only 3. It's interesting.
Yeah, it looks like more shaving. It's so tough when you're playing the reanimate deck. You need the fatty. You need the way to get it into the graveyard. You need the reanimation spell. You want the hand disruption to go after the opponent. And it's hard to maintain a good balance of all of these.
Right.
And so you end up just shaving one of this, one of that type of thing.
Goyf got a little bigger. True Name Nemesis now in the graveyard.
Yeah, and
2-turn clock.
We just see Nathan just run out of resources so quick in each of these games. Goes for it. Noah has the answer. That's the end.
Here's a Cabal Therapy. Targeting Nathan. Noah says, sure. Chancellor of the Annex is the name. Exhume is the play. Brings back True Name Nemesis.
Yes.
Not so bad.
Once again, modern
I believe the phrase is hoisted by his own petard.
That is one of the phrases. That I think more accurately is just he had everything.
Right, that's a good way of looking at it. True Name Nemesis going to get the job done for Noah Walker in combination with the Vapor Snag. And that means there's going to be one game to decide this whole match, and it's going to be Game 3 between Dylan Donegan and Ryan Mochall. Bant Ramp versus Bant Scapeshift. And I think we're going to catch this pretty early on in the goings. Looks like players are just shuffling right now. Good timing on our part. So, Craig, I gave you my proposal.
Okay.
I expect you to have your own proposal on my desk by the time we come back for the next round.
No,
I want to know what your thoughts are on changing Modern around.
I'm good with basically everything that you said. As far as bannings go, it's a delicate balance, right, where you don't want to just torpedo people that have invested a lot into the format.
Absolutely.
But you need to do something, obviously, because Hogak is just too darn good. And I think Faithless Looting is just too darn good as well. Mm-hmm. It's my contention with your proposal is the unbannings.
Okay.
I think I would just take such a cautious approach to unbanning anything. Wizards of the Coast has given us just so many blue cantrips along the way that some of these older, better ones just don't seem necessary to unban.
11:30 Modern Challenge players.
I understand where you're coming from, for sure. We'll have to see how they ultimately choose to approach the problem. I like to do these thought experiments more just to think around the format, think about what's important, more than to actually advocate for any of this. Basically, whatever they do, I'm fine. I'll keep playing the game.
Well, of course.
I'll adapt, and I think that's a healthy attitude to have towards bannings. Just say, okay, show me what you got. But I think it's fun to explore the possibilities and what you could potentially do, and how much of an effect you can really have on the format while still being contemplative of the participants. Players playing at a very rapid pace. You can understand why. They took a lot of time for these first two games. Teferi, first play for Donegan. Meanwhile, Ryan's content to just build mana. You see Elvish Rejuvenator. That's going to go get Field of Ruin. Field of the Dead already on the battlefield. Teferi just going to tick up. Passes the turn back to Ryan.
Yeah, and you see the allure of these Scapeshift decks is that they're just so consistent, right? Yep. Like, you never flood out. You want all the lands on the board. And the more lands you get, the more your lands do what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. There you saw a Krasis for 4, drawing 2 cards. Teferi's going to bounce the Krasis. That's always a scary play. But you see why. It's time for Nissa. And I think this is how Dylan takes this match. He needs to play a tempo style, needs to be somewhat aggressive on the board early, because as soon as these tokens start getting made and start slowing down the onslaught, there's going to be some problems over on Donegan's side.
I agree with you, but bouncing a Krasis is like...
It's scary. It's a scary spot.
Open competitors, that is time in the round. Open competitors, that is time in the round.
And one of the ways that you deal with these wide boards is with sweeping wrath effects, and you don't want to be doing that when you've turned all of your lands into creatures with Nissa.
Right. Yeah, I think we're at the spot where the Scapeshift deck is the one that wants to Wrath eventually.
Yep.
Just make your opponent reset after investing a lot of resources into that Nissa. A lot of mana here, though, for Donegan.
Looks like 8.
Yep, that's my count as well. That means Krasis for 6. 3 cards going to hand. Bigger than opposing Krasis. It's always key.
Yeah, with all these big creatures, I think if you're on Donegan's side, you want... Oh.
Yeah, here we go. Time wipe.
Woof.
Exactly what I was looking for from Ryan.
We got to, get his Krasis back.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's Rejuvenator. Going to go searching for some lands. Misses.
That's a rare.
Misses.
Rare occurrence there.
I was playing a tournament online with Bant Scapeshift, and I missed, and I asked my chat to figure out what my odds of missing were, and they were like 2% or something preposterous. You really shouldn't miss too often with those rejuvenators.
They gave you the old 1 in 50 shot, huh?
Right.
It's funny just looking at this game where Dylan's drawn a ton of extra cards. He has 2 Planeswalkers on the board. He actually still has a lot of mana to work with. Mm-hmm. And I still think I might just like the Bant Scapeshift side of things better.
Well, it's going to depend a lot, I think, on the top of Ryan's deck. Found another land there. It's Rejuvenator. Plenty of lands this time. Didn't see a Field of the Dead, though.
Yeah, the second Field of the Dead would really open things up for him.
And that's when the zombie production gets out of control. Here's Deputy of Detention. Going to take out that Nissa, which was threatening to ultimate. Very good. Scary ultimate on Nissa. Ryan going to play a land untapped here.
Yeah, I think it's about the ultimate, but it's also just about all the extra mana.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Donegan considering what to do with Teferi here.
Yeah, I think he's discussing with his teammates, hey, I can just cast another Nissa here, or I use Teferi and just get my Nissa out from underneath the Deputy, which is going to leave me with a bunch of mana to work with.
Mm-hmm. Really depends on what else is in Donegan's hand. Looks like we're casting a new Nissa. Gonna go ahead and plus, animate that Hallowed Fountain. Very content to just tick up again, it seems. See Ether Gust in hand.
Oh, that card's so good.
Yeah, that could be impactful as this game goes on. Like I said, these matches can be a real slog. Ooh, that's a lot of mana.
Big jellyfish.
Yep. It's Krasis time. Krasis for 8 looks like the number. Trigger resolves. 4 new cards for Ryan. Second Field of the Dead. Very excited to see that for sure. There are a couple more zombies. And, I mean, this kind of sums up this format in a nutshell, right? You see how big things have gotten here. Just how quickly the battlefields escalate out of control. What we saw there was Deputy Detention coming down from Donegan, quickly bounced back to hand by Teferi.
Yeah, it's funny, these matchups where the same thing's going to happen again and again, right, with the Deputy, with the Teferi, but you're fighting a losing battle in that situation because the Scapeshift deck is not going to run out of lands.
What are you playing towards if you're Donegan? What are you trying to ultimately achieve?
Well, I think air superiority is definitely a thing,
right,
where you want to be able to start attacking with your Krasis, pressuring their life total. And he's actually in this position where he can get in with a bunch of these animated lands as well. So it's about answering all of the zombies that are flooding the board while pressuring the opponent. And right now, Donegan's doing that.
Yeah, seemingly has found a way to start generating some pressure. Here's a Leafkin Druid. Here's a Llanowar Elf. And Donegan passes the turn back. Ryan should have a bevy of options presently, just a completely full grip. Here's Memorial of Genius. That's going to make 2 zombies as it enters the battlefield. Any follow-up? I see a lot of lands, possibly all lands.
Yeah. It's so funny because I said, oh, you can't get flooded in this matchup.
Well,
and, he's looking to make a liar out of me.
Ryan might have found a way, despite missing on Elvish Rejuvenator, now has too many lands somehow.
Yeah, I mean, he can actually mount a very effective defense on the ground. he still has a Field of Ruin, so he can blow up one of the creatures, end up with 2 more zombies, make a lot of blocks there.
Well, here's a very, very large Krasis. We'll get a number on that in just a moment. It drew 162 cards, I believe.
The official count.
And I think that is going to be it for time in this match, and that means there are 5 turns left. 3 for Ryan, 2 for Dylan, once we finish this one, to see if someone could be a victor here. Interesting. Don't know if this game's going to get resolved in time. But you got to think it favors Donegan as it sits right now, given what we know about Ryan's hand.
I think you're right, but also Donegan's going to have to start making some pretty mediocre attacks like this.
Yeah.
Where generally, he wouldn't want to just send, trade a 3/3 for a 2/2.
Yeah.
Which is what's going to happen here.
I wonder if Scape Shifts are still in Ryan's deck. Because I could see a certain method of play you would take if you do still have access to Scape Shift. I could see a way you'd play if you didn't, and I think both decisions are somewhat defensible. Certainly, I'm pretty sure there's less than 4 copies in his deck.
Sure.
I don't know if they're all gone, though. So as you said, some effective blocks available for Ryan. Nissa again threatening an ultimate. We'll see if that matters or not. For all the broken things about Nissa, sometimes the ultimate doesn't feel all that damning. Not to say it's not very powerful. It is. But you can beat it.
Yeah, it's usually just all the 3/3 bodies and the double mana that ends up finishing off the game.
Right.
You've accumulated such an advantage by that point that you don't care about the ultimate side of things.
Growth Spiral here for Ryan. That's going to put a couple more zombies onto the battlefield. Able to put in Temple, which is nice because, didn't play the Growth Spiral. Has Growth Spiral in hand. Temple now can choose if he wants to use the Growth Spiral on his turn or if he wants to save it for some surprise zombies in combat.
Yeah, this is a scouting mission for the top of his library.
Yep, absolutely.
And we know there's an Ether Gust on the other side of the board.
Yes, we do.
One of the few cards that's just particularly good against Ether Gust is also just the best possible draw that you can have in these situations. It's the big jellyfish. And I can't imagine it was that card if they had this long of a discussion.
Jellyfish, often the best draw. It does look like we are going to cast Growth Spiral here, though, meaning they wanted the card immediately. What is it? I am dying to know. Reaching for a bunch of mana. Seven mana? Agent of Treachery? Look who it is. Entering the battlefield, thinking about what permanents to take from opponent. It is going to be Teferi, as we talked about. Teferi's superiority is so important here. Going to bounce. Deputy of Detention, draw a card. Effectively killing the Teferi. No value from the second Nissa because there's already one in play. Replay Deputy of Detention, take the Krasi. Donegan responds with Ether Gust on his own Krasis.
His teammates saying, hey, did we want to do that?
Ooh, this game's getting sticky now. Seems like we did want to do that. Time for some zombie attacks. Okay.
It seems tough to make zombie attacks here.
Yeah, ultimately Ryan agrees. Passes the turn back to Donegan. Now in turn 2.
Yeah, a bunch of those zombies had summoning sickness there. If you can only send in 3 or 4 zombies, you're not doing anything effective against the Nissa. You're just going to throw a bunch of your creatures into the graveyard.
Right.
And the big thought process here, if you're in Dylan Donegan's seat, is, all right, I need to kill him next turn, right? I'm going to attack for 4 in the air this turn, bring him to 8. I can deploy a huge Krasis, but what else is in my deck? Do I leave 2 mana up for an Ether Gust? Do I leave 4 mana up for potentially like Ether Gust and Negate if that's in my deck? Those are the questions you have to be asking yourself.
Donegan going to go ahead and check out Agent of Treachery again. Donegan keeping that Krasis on the battlefield pretty huge.
Yeah, there's even Agent of Treachery considerations here, right? Where you say, is there a way where I can play around that card?
Yeah, absolutely. You assume most players packing 2 copies of Agent these days.
You know, even ending up with like a Deputy of Detention to clean up the zombies so you can actually attack on the ground. Another line to think about.
Mm-hmm.
2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, it looks like.
Legacy Challenge players, your next round pairings are making their way to the pairings boards. 130 Legacy Challenge players, your next round pairings are making their way to the pairings.
It is going to be Krasis.
I believe it's an 8/8 here.
You are correct. 4 cards for Donegan. Hydroid Krasis also gets to be a member of my Messed Up Cards Club.
Yeah, it's a pretty ridiculous card.
Yeah.
I mean, just these decks could be playing Teferi and they don't.
All right.
Think of how good Big Teferi is.
Don't need it. Thanks. Got a big jellyfish. Not interested.
That just speaks to how bonkers Modern is, how many good cards there are to draw from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Standard's certainly at its deepest point in a long time right now. So many options for all these decks.
Well, and a lot of the cards, a card like Nicol Bolas, where it's that's a much grindier card to me, right? Where it makes your opponent discard and you draw. It can kill 1 permanent before it's dealt with a lot of the time.
Here's a Deputy from Donegan.
See, I like this.
Yeah, starting to look like we can get some real attacks in now. Another plus from Nissa.
There's just so much pressure here.
I just want to point to how meticulously and carefully Donegan has planned every single aspect of this turn, to how he spent his mana, to what he didn't spend, to how he sized everything.
Yeah, but with those creature lands, he still has plenty of, counter magic left.
Absolutely.
Plenty of mana to play his counter magic. You see he's animated a bunch of blue sources along the way.
Looks like everything is going to attack here. Going to be forced to make some chumps. Is Ryan. Chumps are made.
Oh, getting back to my Nicol Bolas little thing here. There's just so many cards that provide either incidental or direct card advantage in this format that a grindier card just can't be good enough.
Yeah, things are too big.
They're too big. The opponents draw too many cards.
Yep.
There's more powerful stuff. If you consider the tough mana costs of a card like that, there's other ridiculous powerful things you can be doing.
Ryan's going to cash in Memorial here. Takes 2 fresh draws. find circuitous route. I don't see any answers for these Krasis in hand.
Yeah, he needs both the Krasis answer and enough zombies to block everything on the board.
Yeah, that part I think he can manage pretty effectively.
Well, and he has to do it all while working around either gust.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a tall ask.
Well, we are going to reach for some mana. Growth Spiral. Takes the draw, plays a land, gains a life, makes some zombies. I don't think that hand has any answers in it. Ryan keeps revealing it. The contents are not changing.
Yeah, and Dylan's just done a great job this game of keeping pressure on the opponent. When we saw the deputy come down, eat all the zombies, and immediately end up back in the hand.
Here's Scape Shift. Here's Ether Gust. That's going to go back on top of the library. Here's a very small Hydroid Krasis. And the turn is going to go back to Donegan.
That's a little funny. I'm going to make you attack me here.
Not the most impressive Krasis we've seen.
Well, and the jellyfish have trample. You can't even chump block those things.
Yep. Here's Risen Reef doing Risen Reef stuff. There's a handful of Risen Reefs. Man, this deck just goes absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, and I think there are a bunch of people saying, what are we doing here?
It's a fair question. Going to reanimate some lands. Here comes the squad, everyone rumbling, and that is going to get the handshake from Ryan. And the team of Walker, Tomajko, and Donegan moves to 11-2, prime position.